Fewer big favorites when compared to the year before, but also some serious gems.
We must leave no stone unturned.
Today we are ranking over 30 death metal albums from 2001, and we're starting with Blood Red Throne and Monument of Death. The debut album from this Norwegian band, and already a very strong start in my opinion. Once Portrait of a Killer starts kicking into those thrashy transitions and hypnotic grooves, I'm totally into it. Souls of Damnation keeps that same energy going, and there's this malevolent bloodthirst to The Children Shall Endure. Merry Whispers of Death and Ravenous War Machine are Riff City, Malignant Nothingness is infectious as hell, Dream-Controlled Murder has some fantastic atmosphere. The vocals could have a little bit more variety, but other than that, for me, this is perfection. Then we have Aborted with Engineering the Dead. This one largely picks up where the last album left off and leaves me with pretty similar thoughts overall. Plenty of riffs throughout and adding a little more groove and dynamic, solid opener, if a little repetitive at times. The title track Sphincteral Enthrallment is definitely a standout. As I said in the discography ranking, both of these early records have certainly grown on me since the last time I listened, and it's going to great tier. Then we have Skinless with Foreshadowing Our Demise.
I want to kill everyone. Satan is good. Satan is our pal.
The second album from this Glens Falls, New York band formed back in '92. Slammy, brutal stuff with more of that dodgeball snare and some fun use of samples. Sick grooves on tracks like The Optimist, also loves Salvage What's Left, and the opening of Pool of Stool is both hilarious and totally brutal. It's going to fantastic. Then we have Brodequin with Festival of Death. Another gurgle and blast beat gauntlet. As always, if you love that, do you and love it. Like, by all means. For me, though, it just ends up running together, which is kind of really boring, just despite the speed. Despite the intensity of it, you'd think that it would be hard to describe this as boring, but that's it for me. It just ends up being as exciting as listening to, like, TV static for 30 minutes, so just landed at okay for me. Then we have Deeds of Flesh with Mark of the Legion. Album 4 from this California technical, brutal death metal band. Interesting thoughts on this one, as it's largely more of the same, which could mean similar reactions, but really it feels like the shtick is getting a little bit tired at this point. Still, plenty of great tracks here. Fulfilled in Warfare certainly stands out. Master of Murder is also really good. I'm going to put this at amazing. Then we have Mortician with Domain of Death. I feel like I've already made myself clear in discussing the previous albums from this band. Similar to Brodequin, their style is mostly just barely audible gurgles buried behind a barrage of blast beats. But I will say that this album actually feels like a slight improvement and at least keeps things somewhat interesting with the changing pacing. Also lots of alternations between the full speed ahead chaos with slower, groovier, and sometimes even doomy sections. Still not really my thing, but if I was in the mood for this style from this year, I'd be more likely to reach for this one. So it went to good tier. We have plenty more albums, but as always, if you're enjoying the video so far, hit the like button, really helps me out, and also comment your favorites and least favorites from this year. You can also add additional albums, but don't give me that stupid "where's blah blah blah?" question mark exclamation point. I'm not a monkey to dance for you, okay? But next up, we have Arch Enemy with Wages of Sin. This marks the beginning of the Angela Gossow era, which I think is the band's best era. Personally, Enemy Within continues to be my favorite Arch Enemy song and album opener too, to this day. And fortunately, there are plenty of other great tracks here too, like Burning Angel with those dueling leads, the thrashy riffing on Ravenous, great dynamics on Savage Messiah, and the Raging the First Deadly Sin. Top fan-rated album on Metal Storm, and easily my favorite again of their discography as well. You can also check out my thoughts on the entire discography with this band as well as a few others on this list. But this one is going to perfection. Another band you can check out my full discography tier list for, we have Soilwork with A Predator's Portrait. Another famous Swedish melodic death metal band starting to make a shift here from their aggressive beginnings to a more melodic sound that they've become known for. Once more kicking off on a killer opener with Bastard Chain, more emphasis on groove though, with Like the Average Stalker and Neurotica Rampage, and then more career favorites in Needlefast and Grand Failure Anthem. Also starting to incorporate clean vocals, though they're a little bit hit and miss on this one in comparison to the albums to come. Very fun record regardless, it is going to fantastic. And we have Amon Amarth with The Crusher. More melodeath from Sweden, and of the earlier albums, unfortunately, this is easily my least favorite by a pretty wide margin. The songwriting just isn't as engaging, the production feels off, the pacing's a little bit clunky, and it's just missing that special sauce. Feels like a very transitional record with the slower moments teasing the direction of the next album, but not quite getting there yet. Lots of second-rate, kind of forgettable material here save for a few decent bangers like Bastards of a Lying Breed, Releasing Surtur's Fire, and especially The Sound of Eight Hooves, which is easily the best track on the album. Not awful by any means, but not one I go back to much. Still pretty solid on this list though, so it's going to great tier. You can check out my thoughts on that discography as well as the brand new ranking I've done for 6 Feet Under, and here we have True Carnage.
Oh god, how embarrassing.
Just a few seconds into Impulse to Disembowelment, we have the true birth of the E. Now, I can't for the life of me understand people who can listen to those vocals and not only not laugh, but straight up think that this is peak death metal. But I have seen those people in my comments. This is not a straw man. They are real somehow. The Day the Dead Walked is also especially hilarious, and the Ice-T feature on One Bullet Left is just beyond terrible in my opinion. At least it's funny. It's kind of entertaining, but it's definitely going to meh. Then we have Murder Squad with Unsane, Insane, and Mentally Deranged. Another Swedish band I was not previously familiar with, serving up the first of just 2 albums before splitting up. Pretty punky, D-beat-driven stuff, mixing some doom on some level comparable to Autopsy, but with some clear hardcore influence as well. Solid stuff with a lot of energy, but not much more than that when it comes to real substance, if you ask me, so they went to good tier. Then we have Azarath with Demon Seed. Another debut, this one out of Poland, and true to the region, maintaining a similar blackened death metal aesthetic as groups like Behemoth. I don't think they're as good as Behemoth, but they really know how to bring this very infectious bounce to a lot of their instrumentation, especially on tracks like Heaven's Light Demise. Lots of great drumming and rhythm changes, keeping things very textured, and another one that leaves you wanting more at a very tight runtime. It's going to amazing. Then we have Sceptic with Pathetic Being. The second album from this Polish tech death band we did not cover in the 1999 albums list. The production ain't great, but I love how crazy the bass sounds on this album, and the thrashy speed really gets my motor running. Fantastic guitar work all over this thing, and really riding the line stylistically between melodeath and the harsher forms of death metal. I ended up putting this one at perfection. It was one of my favorites of the list. Then we have Demence with Goutte à Goutte. One of the more dynamic listens on this list from this returning Quebec group with their second and, as of now, final album. They deliver right from the top with the brute force blast beats and aggression, but also much more groovy and on some level progressive sounding tracks like Micromass. Modus Eventre also had some touches that really caught me off guard. Not nearly as wild as the debut, but still a very interesting listen. It's going to great tier. And we have Pyaemia with Cerebral Serial. Another case of a one-and-done album from a band I was not previously familiar with. Brutal death from the Netherlands with similarities to the likes of Deeds of Flesh, Suffocation, and Dying Fetus. Some members went on to form Arsbreed. Very solid for the genre. I saw quite a few positive fan rankings for this one too. It gets me both grooving and banging my head, solid production, and it flies by. So I'm going to put this one at fantastic. Love that album title too. That just really conjures an image. Then we have Gorgasm with Bleeding Profusely. The first album of 4 from this Chicago brutal death metal band I'd compare to Cannibal Corpse. Super fast and heavy stuff that blazes by in just under 24 minutes. Another one proving that less is more in a genre like this. Solid production type performances. I think the only thing holding it back is that it isn't super memorable. So put it at good tier. Then we have Viral Load with Practitioners of Perversion. Album number 2 from this gurgly Texas brutal death metal band. The cover art and song titles are already pretty try-hard edgelord stuff that I might have found amusing when I was like 14, but it just doesn't help that the music isn't much better either. Super obvious programmed drums and generic chord progressions don't really give me much to work with here. Frankly, it's not too far removed from 6 Feet Under, if I'm being honest. So yeah. Viral Load went to meh.
The music's bad and you should feel bad.
Then we have Eternal Tears of Sorrow with A Virgin and a Horror. Album 4 from this Finnish melodic death metal band, the album title and artwork giving me Cradle of Filth vibes, as does the overall melodramatic atmosphere, but the synth gives me kind of a like Finn Troll meets Kalma energy. Solid melodies and loving the piano, but the vocals can feel a little bit like overly laid back, really chill stuff though, and well produced. It is going to amazing. Then we have Skyfire with Timeless Departure. I consider myself to be a bit of an early melodic death metal aficionado, but every now and then I come across a name that I'm not familiar with, and this is one of them. This is the first of 4 albums from this Swedish band, and awful cover art aside, it's really good. I love the piano and symphonic elements and overall composition, though I will say that the mix leaves something to be desired with the synth and vocals a bit too loud and the guitars too quiet. Also a shrill emphasis on the treble with hardly any bass end. Still strongly recommended to fans of Kalma and Children of Bodom in particular. It's going to fantastic. Then we have Cataclysm with Epic, the Poetry of War. Now, alternatively, I'm seeing some decently high fan rankings for this Canadian Melodeath album, but I'm not finding myself enjoying it nearly as much as the last one. Don't get me wrong, it's still strong, but it also just strikes me as that kind of early Amon Amarth sound, but not as good or as focused. The vocals also still feel very amateurish to me. I see a lot of defenders in the comments of people saying, "You're crazy, I love how he sounds." You know, that's great. Different strokes. I find it to be annoying. I find it to sound he's just spitting out whatever comes to mind. It doesn't feel particularly like he's treating his vocals like an instrument, but some people like that, so that's fine. Me, personally, it wasn't bad. It wasn't one of the top picks on this list. It was somewhere around the middle, so it went to great tier.
It's the children who are wrong.
Then we have Disavowed with Perceptive Deception. The debut album from this Netherlands brutal death metal band, and whatever the exact opposite phrase for the full package is, this album is that. Just bad production, generic writing, bland performances, just absolute cookie cutter death metal. Did not care for it. It went to meh. Then we have Funebrarum with Beneath the Columns of Abandoned Gods. Another debut album, this one from New Jersey, and arguably one of the most traditionally old school albums on this list. Interesting how in just a few years we went from almost every death metal album sounding like this to barely any. And frankly, they do the sound very well, but it still ends up sounding a little bit recycled at this point. So they went to good tier. Then we have Gorguts with From Wisdom to Hate. This album takes the insanity of Obscura and fuses it with elements of their older elements to an extent. Very impressive, highly dynamic, a bit more concise, orderly, but not as groundbreaking, I would say. Some truly catastrophic bangers, but also some down moments to really up the contrast. Sadly, this was the last album with drummer Steve McDonald, with his unfortunate death leading to them disbanding at this point before they came back. This is going to amazing. Then we have Hypnos with The Revenge Ride. The second album from this Czechia band, really great riffing and production. I hear notes of everything from Bolt Thrower to Carcass, great pacing with a killer mix of grooves and faster sections. Really consistent too. Every song seems to only get better from the last, and you really feel the concise, airtight nature of that 35-minute runtime. I went round and round with this album, and ultimately this one felt deserving though of perfection. Then we have Sinister back with Creative Killings. Album 5 from another Netherlands band who previously impressed me with their early works during the 90s list, Rachel Heiser of Occult and Pathology taking over on vocals, and she steps in with plenty of brutality. I saw a lot of middling fan ratings in my research with this one, but honestly, I think it's a big step up from the last one with its sheer velocity and intensity alone. Plenty of banger tracks, namely the face-melting moralistic Suffering. I ended up putting it at great tier. Then we have Bolt Thrower with Honor, Valor, Pride. Another rock-solid album from this UK band. Contact Wait Out has a very hypnotic, almost Godflesh industrial groove to it, and inside The Wire mixes a little bit of that with thrashier guitars for almost like a Ministry energy. And speaking of which, I just like the overall energy of this one as a fan of that sound, but I do feel like all of these songs are maybe just a minute or two longer than they really need to be. Valor picks up the pace a bit. I like that transition in the middle of A Hollow Truce, and Pride has some really great bluesy hooks, but does not need to be nearly 7 minutes long. So this one went to fantastic. Then we have Jungle Rot with Dead and Buried. So I think we may have missed Slaughter the Week on the 97 video, but we're back with this Wisconsin band's third album. I really enjoyed the debut, but I find this one to be a slog. Basically, take a similar sound to that Bolt Thrower album, but then execute it with half the quality. It just feels like an endless march of completely generic grooves. It's at least well produced and performed effectively enough, but the writing is just so boring to me, so it landed at okay. Then we have Deicide with In Torment in Hell. Highly criticized for being rushed and not meeting songwriting standards, Steve Asheim says that they were burnt out on each other. Rarely any of these songs are played live. Also pretty lame, but I feel like it's better than the last one in the instrumentation at least. It feels a little bit like a lower tier Cannibal Corpse album. Honestly, it's not that bad, especially in comparison to some of the actual horrors that we've covered here today, but it's easily one of, if not their worst. I would still, on this list, put it at good. Then we have Gojira with Terra Incognita. For those only familiar with what this popular French band sounds like now, it might be jarring to hear just how heavy they were on this debut. I still tend to prefer the From Mars to Sirius sound from them, but this is a pretty unique album in its own right, especially on this list. Just so much atmosphere, and the grooves really get under your skin. There are definitely some lower moments, and it feels a bit all over the place, but when it hits so hard. Like that riff on Space Time alone is pure hype. A little dubious to purely call this death metal at times. Like, at this point you could consider adding Meshuggah on these lists, but I think that they're more of like a thrash-rooted band, technically, especially if you listen to their first album, but I still think this one warrants inclusion, and it's going to amazing. Then we have Psychroptic with the Isle of Disenchantment. These Australian tech deathers kicking off their career heavy with this album packed with Floridian-influenced guitars and dodgeball ping snares. Matthew Chalk providing vocals here, and unfortunately between them and the production, it feels, again, pretty amateurish, I would say. Another case of they get much better from here, especially with 2003's Scepter of the Ancients, but there are glimmers of something more, as with Of Dull Eyes Born and Psychroptopath, but this one is just going to okay. And then, of course, we have Opeth with Blackwater Park. What can be said about this album that others, including myself, haven't already said? This is the seminal album that Rolling Stone named number 55 on their 100 Greatest Metal Albums of All Time list. Leave it to Ackerfeld and the help of legendary Steven Wilson to craft an experience that is still just as satisfying to this day. From the opening notes of The Leper Affinity to the closing melodies of the title track, start to finish, it is, of course, absolute perfection. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings by year, or also by discography too, or this video for something a little bit different. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.